So I'm a caregiver and a mom of a beautiful young girl, Johanna Benthal, as most of you have met her this weekend. Johanna is going to be 18, she's going to be 19 actually in August. Johanna was born with CCM3 and she's had over 80 brain surgeries. And in those years, they haven't all been related to CCM. She's had about 15 Cavernous resected brain. But she did develop hydrocephalus, similar to Julia's situation. That's how we ended up going to the hospital, was the presenting with the bulging fontanelle. And then since that time, it's the managing. She did require a shunt, for her situation. So a lot of those surgeries have been shunt malfunctions. We've had shunts in every place imaginable, in the head, putting the valve down in her chest, she now has a shunt system that's a very complicated system, made in Germany, and she actually has 3 valves in her brain, and then it flows into her, the subclavian by the heart. So it's been quite the journey, and it took us a while to get diagnosed with CCM3, and I think that was one of the first times that I talked to Connie. We did have genetic testing, not for CCM, because CCM wasn't in existence at the point when we had the genetic testing as far as the CCM 1, 2, and 3. And so it was just one of the things that one of the doctors did. They told us to, send your blood to Duke University. There's something going on there. Well, we did it. I left it, and we were so busy having brain surgery. She had her first brain surgery when she was 3 months old. And then she had about 6 in the first year of her life. And then, she would average 3 to 4 a year. So it was quite a challenging thing. But Johanna she's an amazing kid, as I know that anybody who's talked to her this weekend can attest to. She is impaired, she is cognitively impaired and physically impaired. And her memory is where she really struggles, and she struggles to read and to write. So, she just needs a little extra help, and that's how we do life with this. But I'm going to let you hear in her own words what it's like for her with CCM3. You always get upset when you're practicing. That's tacky.
Just too much. This song is what we all grew up watching that shows. So that's where this song popped up. Yeah, she doesn't see that to me mostly. Had 8 circles in my brain. I have CCM3, which is a genetic mutation that very few kids have. Let's just say I cannot do things most of my friends can do. And that makes it very hard at times. Very frustrating. What happens when I have seizures is I can't really talk when it's happening, so I try to tell someone, but I don't really know how to talk with someone. It's affecting my ability to read and write. I'm definitely not stopping. Nothing stops me. I need to do stuff. I have a daily schedule that I really have. And my mom doesn't look at the calendar. The teacher comes, we basically just been focusing on arts and crafts. We raise dogs for humans. Doing that has graduating tech, or me just having to I struggle with confidence. There are definitely some times that I feel like I'm being in a way rejected by just everybody. It's definitely hard to say what I'm thinking or feeling makes sense. How I overcome the fear of going into surgery. I just know that my mom's gonna be there through everything, that God's gonna be there with me through everything. I have my strength.
Okay, so that's Johanna in her own words, and she'd be very happy to keep going and telling you even more in her own words. She's really amazing. So when Johanna was born, I'm sorry, I'm used to having my husband do all. Okay, so when Johanna was born, and I just knew that there was something wrong, even in the delivery room. It was just very, something wasn't right. And it was funny because at that point I was 33 when Johanna was born, and she is my fourth. And the nurse said to me, I said, something doesn't feel right. I think there's something not right. And she said, honey, you're just old. 33. She was my fourth baby, and that's what she said to me, honey, you're just old. And I said, okay, so, we just went on with life, and for those first 3 months of her life, I kept having this nudging feeling that something wasn't right. And I would look at Johanna, and sometimes she was very floppy, sometimes she was very tight, and she didn't seem to be focusing as well as I thought she did. So we went for the regular appointments, and she was on target at the regular appointments, which was really funny because we were having a little bit more difficulty at home. But when we would go to the doctor, all of a sudden she'd focus on the doctor, or she'd follow her. As most of you can attest to, it happens all the time, right? My mom used to say, I'm one of 8, she used to say, whenever I take you guys to the doctor, that's it, all the symptoms are gone, right? So that's kind of what happened with us too. And while that was going on for those first 3 months, I began having these nightmares. And the nightmares, I wasn't sure if it was like a postpartum thing or what was going on. But it was the same nightmare, and it was almost every night. And I was out in the middle of the ocean, and I was treading water with Johanna in my arms. And it was just a bleak, dark ocean. I couldn't see any land, and we were treading water. And I'd wake up, in a profuse sweat, and be like, oh, I think I gotta do something about this postpartum thing. Of course I didn't. But I have to say, that first night when she was 3 months old and the bulging fontanelle started, and we went to the emergency room, and they told us that they needed to do a CAT scan of her brain, that something could be wrong with her brain. I looked at the neurologist and I said to him, does a CAT scan show a brain tumor? My husband almost fell on the floor, and the neurologist looked me in the eye and said, yes, it could if there is one there. They all kind of thought, like, this looks really weird. Why did you go to that point? So she had the CAT scan, and the doctor came out, and I really appreciate your sharing your experience. It's like right in my mind. I can see him. I know he was a resident, and he came out and he said, I need to bring the two of you in to show you the CAT scan, which was very, very helpful. It was helpful to see the image itself and not just be told. So he showed us the CAT scan of her brain, and when we saw, her brain was covered in cerebral spinal fluid. Like the hydrocephalus was so bad that you could barely see. And then here at the base of her brain, compressing her brainstem, was a very large mass. And at the time, we didn't know it was a cavernous angioma. And it actually took about a year and a half before we did know that it was a cavernous angioma. So, but when I saw that CAT scan, my brain went back to those nightmares. And I felt like, oh, finally, I know what's going on here. And I realized that the nightmare was actually a preparation, for what was going on. And it was like a tap on the shoulder, trust your instincts and keep connected. You're on the right track. That's really how I took it. So the weirdest experience, and if I had somebody really psychoanalyze those first, few weeks, and I have talked to some people that have said that, it was my stress response was to go into this like almost denial. I didn't go into a denial. I actually felt better when I looked at that CAT scan, as ridiculous as it sounds, because I knew something was wrong. I knew I was out in the ocean by myself, holding her up in my arms, and I was trying to get help, but there wasn't any help to give until that CAT scan revealed the truth that was going on in my baby's brain. So while my husband, we had two different reactions, which is understandable. While my husband was totally devastated by the news, I felt a sense of relief. And I remember the long walk with Johanna on the hospital bed from the radiology unit up to the pediatric ICU. And I remember I was babbling on to the resident saying, I actually feel kind of relieved. And I think I may have even told him about this dream, and he just kept looking at me like, I said, I feel like I was somehow prepared, and now we're going to get the help. And he just shook his head and he said, nothing could ever prepare a parent for news like this. But that is how I felt. I really did feel a sense of, now we're not going to be doing it by ourselves. Now I know I'm not going crazy with these postpartum dreams. Now I know that we're going to get through this. So it was that very first night. And it's not that wasn't a traumatic event. It was a traumatic event for all of us. And it is one that is imprinted in my mind. But it's also imprinted with knowing that we were going to have the tools that we needed, because now we were bringing it out in the open. Everybody else was seeing what was going on in Johanna's brain. So that first night in 1996 was the beginning of a very, very difficult period in our life. That, a very difficult period in our life of many, many surgeries. In those first 10 years, she probably had about 50 surgeries. And it was hard and it was difficult. The funny thing that happened with the surgeries was those nightmares actually continued, but they would change. So sometimes we'd be out as a family, we'd be out in having a nice time at the beach. I can't really get my husband to go to the beach. He never liked it before, and now he really hates the beach. So we would be out on the beach and we'd be playing as a family. Johanna is the youngest of four, and all of a sudden a tsunami would come and it would take us all out. And the end of the dream would be the same thing. I'd be holding Johanna in my arms, treading water. And they would, as it took different forms and I continued to have the dreams, it also seemed to precede a particular difficult time. Like there was one summer when Johanna, believe it or not, she ended up with a yeast infection in her brain, and she almost died from that infection in her brain. And we were in the ICU for 3 months. I watched like all the fireworks, from the ICU windows, and it was just a real difficult time. I had a dream right before that. It was almost like this, time of preparation. And it was hard, and it was helpful. It was hard, but it helped to prepare me. So finally, when she was about 8 or 10 years old, I had that dream again. But it changed. I was out in the middle of the ocean, and I was holding Johanna in my arms, and I heard a voice in that dream. And the voice said to me, "You can let go. You're in the ocean of my mercy. And as you let go, you're going to feel like you're beginning to drown as the water rises over your heads. But I'll teach you a new way of breathing, how to breathe underwater." Johanna ended up having surgery just about a week after I had that dream. And I wrote that dream down in my journal. I've been using journaling I've been keeping a journal for about 35 years. And it really makes a tremendous difference in my life and in my recovery and how I process life. So I remember I wrote down the dream in my journal. And I wrote down those words, breathing underwater. And I knew that someday I would end up telling the story, and that story would be called Breathing Underwater. So that's where we are. So we began our journey, into writing this book over the last year and a half. And 18 months ago, I celebrated my 50th birthday. And it was a very exciting time for me. So when I go off for my 50th birthday, I'll go to a retreat house or I'll go to a hotel. I actually, believe it or not, I want to be by myself on my birthday. It's kind of something I started in my 20s before we were married. And so every year I go off by myself and just have time to myself. That 50th birthday, I sat and I brought my journals and pictures and things and my laptop, and I began to see that there was a story to be told. There was actually this understanding of breathing underwater. There was actually a strategy that I could share with others. And so that's how I ended up writing the book, Breathing Underwater. I hired a coach to help me, just to focus, to make sure I talk to him every single week, and I'm still talking to him every single week, which has been a wonderful thing. And going through learning how to, I was already a writer, I'm a columnist for a couple of papers, but beginning to tell the story, to find ways to do that. So in my 50th year, I began to just put it all down on paper and then published, and now I do some speaking. And so this is the strategy that I've come up with. It's really a change in perspective. So as I've been working with caregivers, everybody has something to bring to the story, but this is our story, and this is the way that I can share with you some strategies that might help you. So I'm going to go through the acronym that I developed. It's called BREATHE, BREATHE. And with that, some of the simple things that we can all do to help us to cope with the stresses and help us to cope with the difficulties of being both the caregiver and also the person that is affected. What I have found, and actually it was funny because in the marketing portion of my coach certification training, we actually tested the image of this. That is my arm. I was out in the middle of the Peconic Bay on Long Island on October 1st. I will tell you that the air outside, the temperature outside was a little cool, but the water temperature was 70 degrees, so it was okay. So, and I was holding up a rose. It was funny because my son, he's a photographer, and he actually came up with the idea for the image. And it was to be a sense of the struggle of feeling like you're drowning, right? And also to have a sense of there's a triumph, and holding the rose is like a sign of for me, a sign of life and hope and endurance. And he got me, my son got me. He understood what I was working on, and he said, he came up with that and said, he said, do you want to go in the water? I'm like, no, I want to do it. So we did that, and when we tested it with the ICCA program, it was very interesting because those were the images that were resounding with people. Because I think all of us can relate to the sense of feeling like we're drowning, right? Can you relate to that sense of feeling like you're drowning? And what is the thing that people most of the time say to you? Just keep your head above the water, right? Well, the reality for me is what I realized, and for most people that I work with, there's those times when you just can't keep your head above the water. So the sense of what we can do is to find strategies to learn how to breathe when you feel like you're drowning. So the first strategy is to believe. Now, for me, believing is based in a relationship with God. But for all of us, belief is finding that purpose in the struggle, right? When you're going through all these difficulties and you feel like, what purpose does this serve? And yet look around the room here. Look at those kids in the other room. You see that they have a purpose. We have a purpose. Even if our purpose in any given day, even if we lose our ability to speak, to walk, to do the daily things that we have done in our lives, we hold a unique purpose in just being who we are. Maybe by our struggles in experiencing these bleeds and the difficulties that comes with CCM and CCM 1, 2, and 3, we are able to bring out the best in somebody else as they are trying to help us. So belief is the first point to breathing underwater for me, and for all of us, is to find something beyond yourself. Believe in something beyond yourself to know that there's a purpose. The second point is to restore. When it comes to restoration, I used to think to restore something meant to take it from what happened here back to where we were before, right? We think of restoring as, we're gonna restore our internet power. We're gonna put it back and we'll have it back on. We're gonna restore our house to its original beauty, or restore it because it's falling apart. Now we're gonna build it all together. Restoration, especially when you've experienced traumatic brain injury, and you've gone through the difficulties that so many of us have gone through, it doesn't necessarily look like what it was going to look like before. So it's a new restoration. But the way that we get to restoration, I talked about the first point in restoration is to choose gratitude. To choose gratitude. I get up every single day and decide that I'm going to be thankful for one thing. It might only be coffee. And I was very thankful when we found out that the decaf coffee that I was drinking actually needed to be switched to be the regular coffee, because that would not have been fun. So we choose one thing to be thankful for so that we can restore. It's really cool that in the word restore is the word rest. We need rest. There's been so many studies that have shown with people with brain injury, one of the things that you need is sleep. You really need to rest. The brain needs to sleep. In fact, I'm always having to modify Johanna's day based on what has happened, because I know that she needs a lot more sleep to restore, and I need rest. So I need time away from her, away from the struggles, and just to rest. I absolutely need 8 hours of sleep. When I don't get 8 hours of sleep, it's a very difficult time for me. So I go to bed early and I wake up early. And then for me, around 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning is my time of rest. After I've had a good night's sleep, that's my time for exercise. That's my time for prayer and meditation. That's my time to go out for a walk or to go out for a run. It's a time to refresh, restore, replenish. And so we need to choose restoration. When we choose restoration, we can come back and our perspective is really changed. The third point in breathing underwater is to engage. Think about when we're under stress, one of the things that we want to do is disconnect, right? And that's not a bad thing. Like I'm talking about restoration. It's really the wonderful tips that Connie gave to us, going out into nature. There's ways that we need to unplug, disconnect. However, we need to first, why are we doing those things? It's to engage. It's to engage with our inner self, right? To engage with who we are, to engage with understanding what's happened to us, and now where are we going to go with that, and also engaging with one another. That is such a key point. And I think that under stress, sometimes the disconnect takes a very negative point. Sometimes the disconnect is through food and alcohol and obsessively hanging out on Facebook, and just like trying to zone out. So when we choose to engage with one another after we've kind of gotten more in touch with ourselves, beautiful things happen. I have a really good story from the Angioma Alliance. So Connie came right to my aid via on the other end of the phone, as I'm sure so many of you have experienced. And it changed my life forever, connecting with the Angioma Alliance. And she told me at that time, about another family in California whose children were affected by this same disease. And she introduced me to Liz. So Liz and I experienced a really wonderful compliment last night. Someone up here, and I can't remember who it was, said, "Oh, I was sitting behind you guys, and I thought you two were sisters." The first time that Liz and I connected over the phone, and we realized we had so many similarities in our life, including CCM3, and then our kids and what we were going through. We're both Catholics, we were both homeschooling, and it was like this mind meld that happened from the east end of Long Island to California. She helps to keep me engaged. We need to find people like ourselves who understand the plight of what we're going through. And the Angioma Alliance is a wonderful, wonderful place to do that. You can find people who are going through a similar struggle, who have been through a similar struggle, and they're really doing okay. So it's important for us to engage. The next point in breathing underwater is to advocate. So the first advocacy that I will tell you that you need to have as caregivers, and even as someone that has gone through the disease itself, through the illness, is advocacy. We have to advocate for ourselves. That's the first person that we need to advocate for. Especially as caregivers, we're often very, very good at advocating for those that we care for, right? And that skill of advocacy goes into so many other avenues in our life. You should have seen Liz last night when they wanted to give us a 14 feet for the bottle of wine. That skill of advocacy just took a whole new level. And we did have the glass of wine. Anyway, but we have to learn to advocate for ourselves, to know when we need time away, to know when we need time for rest and to take care of ourselves. So the very first person that you need to learn to advocate with is for ourselves. And it's a really important skill. In addition, that advocacy that we have to do for our children, for those that we care for. How many of you, before you started this, had some sense of medical language or things about neurology? How many of you were already versed? Yep, a few of you have, right, from your training. Now, how many of you could actually define these things that we're talking about and are very well versed in terms of neurology and neurosurgery? And yes, you are. Everybody raise your hands because we learn. And that's a wonderful skill that we've learned. And that's an advocacy skill. And it's very important to continue to grow in our advocacy skill. It's also important as an advocate to go in the places that you're most uncomfortable with as well. To step out and to say, you know what, it's time for me to share with the school. I have to sit down and go through the IEP, and it can get very wearing, but advocacy is the way to survive when you feel like you're drowning. Because if we don't learn to advocate for ourselves and those that we love, we're just going to keep sinking lower and lower, and we'll never be able to take a breath. For me, I have ended up advocating in very odd situations. I was on the national news a few times, over insurance issues that we had. And the most scariest time in my entire life when I was challenging the Senate Majority Leader on the national news because I was upset with something that he said from the Senate floor. So, you never know where your advocacy is going to take you. What I want to encourage you, and I encourage all the caregivers that I work with, is that you need to step out into those very areas even when you're feeling uncomfortable, because advocacy is a lifeline for us. The next point is time. I have reasons, or I had reasons for why I did what I did. I used to have a lot of reasons for why I work from home. I have reasons for why I drive a car with 200,000 miles on it, why I put my best laid plans aside to have a cup of coffee with my young adult kids. But now, all that has changed. The best reason that I do what I do is so I can have more time. So that I can have more time with my family, with my kids, more time for myself. Time is a very, very important treasure that we have, and it's essential to learning how to breathe underwater. I'd like to show you a picture. This is my sister. My sister Marita just died 3 weeks ago, and she died of MS and other neurodegenerative diseases. When we took that picture, that's the last time she was with me on Long Island. She was visiting last year. By that time, in a span of about 3 years, she went from being an athlete, a teacher, an amazing woman with tremendous strength and running around taking care of her 2 kids, to not really being able to walk very well, not being able to talk very well. And her brain was affected not by CCM, ironically, but probably something else like frontal temporal lobe dementia. She was not properly diagnosed, was part of the reason. But she was experiencing an atrophy of the frontal and temporal lobes of her brain that affected her speech and affected her motor. So when she came to visit me last year, she came twice, once for my mom's 90th birthday and once just to hang out. My niece brought her. That was at the airport on Long Island, the last time she was with us on Long Island. And when I said goodbye to her, I realized again, the most important thing, the most important gift that we have is time. So I wanted to take, at that moment, that was literally time standing still. If I could have just swallowed her whole and taken her back to my house, I wanted to just take care of her and make everything right. But I couldn't. And a year later, just on July 1st, she died. But in her death and in the difficulties that we went through and the difficulties that we've experienced living with a life-threatening illness, especially with Johanna, in and out, and we've been to those places where we didn't know if she was going to live or die from a particular surgery. Those are the times that I realized that time is an important gift, and it's a very precious gift that we have. So we need to take the time that we have to share with one another, to care for one another, and take the time for ourselves to refresh. The next point to breathing underwater is hope. I have a favorite Bible verse, and it says, "Hope isn't hope if its object is seen." And it crosses all boundaries in truth. Hope isn't hope if its object is seen. And think about hope. Think about hope. We can say, I'm hoping tomorrow I'll have enough time to take care of this. I'm hoping that, we'll sell this or that. We'll sell the car. I'm hoping that in 5 years we'll be able to. So hope isn't something that you have it right before you, right? It's something that you look toward down the road. To breathe underwater, to go through these difficult times that we go through, we have to hold on to hope. Sometimes I go to bed at night and I am wiped out and I've got nothing else to give, and that's as I well should be, at the end of a really hard day. But I know that when I wake up in the morning, there's going to be a new hope. I just do, because I decide when I go to bed at night, when I wake up in the morning, there's going to be new hope. So it's a decision that we make. Hope is really a decision to believe that out there's an answer. That in the future, things are going to get better. Because when we have that goal and that vision before us, somehow things just start to happen. When I set out to write this book, it was crazy. It's like my mother kept saying to me, how can you add one more thing to your life? But it was a wonderful experience for me of reflecting back on our 18-year journey and also having that vision before me of hope, of knowing that there is a future full of hope. And I really just want to encourage you that no matter how difficult life gets, there's always a hope ahead. Even for those of us who may be facing even more challenges in our life, there is always hope. And if you focus on the hope, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're going to experience a greater freedom and be able to take a breath. The final point to breathing underwater is to endure. I am sort of a runner. There, I said it. My kids are going to laugh when they see this. I am sort of a runner. Last year, I told you that I go for walks in the morning, and I use that time as I use the rosary, which is a traditional prayer to walk with as I go, and I use that time as my worry time too, where I just keep handing over all these things and surrendering the difficulties that I'm going through and kind of process through. It's a combination of meditation and obsession, but I work it out. So one day I just started to walk a little, run a little, walk a little, run a little. And I felt a lot better. So I ran my first 5Ks over last year. I ran 2 or 3? 2. And it was a really good experience because I did the same thing. I shouldn't say I did the same thing. I didn't walk, run, because I felt the peer pressure. So I'm like, I can't stop. So by the time I got to the finish line of the first 5K, I dropped. Back to my friend and my husband were like, oh my God, are you all right? I was fine. I was fine. So this year was a little bit harder. I was diagnosed with MS about 2 years ago, and I started active treatment for MS. And this year it's really kicking my butt. So I had a hard winter. I was really struggling with getting out there and running. So coming out of the winter, I didn't get into the same training that I was last year. When my sister died in July 1st, I decided that I'm going to sign up for the next 5K. So I have 30 days to get back. I have been running a little bit, but not on a training schedule. So what I know from this, and what I know from our own struggle, and what I know from even the autoimmune disease that I'm managing in my own life, that the only way to build endurance is really to train little by little by little by little. And the way to do all of this, to breathe underwater, is to build that endurance in the struggle. So hopefully you'll be hearing from me that I got through that 5K. I know I will, because now I'm not going to run it just for myself and my kids and Johanna. I'll be running it for my sister, because I wish that I could have helped her to train in that way. So maybe I could have, I don't know that she could have done a 5K, but it's another way, to help me to push in that endurance. And we're actually going to have Johanna in the wheelchair, and I have a couple of people who are going to be switching off with me, because if I have to push her the whole way, then she's going to be pushing me by the end of that 5K. So the final point to breathing underwater is to endure. So Liz, can you go get Johanna for me? This is not, breathing underwater is not a, I actually have developed a program called Breathing Underwater that complements the book. The book actually emerged out of work that I've already been doing. And so I do run webinars for caregivers. We're actually launching a whole new program in September of online support for caregivers. And really, it's really that change in perspective. It's coming together as caregivers, as those who feel overwhelmed, to have that perspective changed so that we can look at life a little bit differently, and then the outcomes in our lives do get better. Because even if our struggles don't change, our disposition and our perspective on those struggles change. So I do have books in the back for sale, as you know, if you want to do that, if she comes. But I'd like to conclude now with a song that Johanna and I have done together. Okay, ready? Hold on 1 second, Joe. Come on up. This is a video that my husband put together, and we have a little song that we do, because I believe that breathing underwater, learning how to take a breath while you feel like you're drowning, is all in our perspective. So Johanna and I would like to share with you this song that we have about changing perspective, right? Are you gonna let me sing? Yeah. We pray for blessings, we pray for peace, comfort for family, protection while we sleep. We pray for healing, for prosperity. We pray for your mighty hand to ease our suffering, and all the while you hear each sentence repeat. Long as we have faith to believe. What if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? And what if trials of this life are your mercies in disguise? We pray for wisdom, your voice to hear. We cry in anger when we cannot feel you near. We doubt your goodness, we doubt your love, as if every promise from your word is not enough. And all the while, you hear each desperate plea. Long as we have faith to believe. What if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? What if trials of this life are your mercies in disguise? When friends betray us, when darkness seems to win, we know the pain reminds us this is not a home. It's not a home. What if your blessings come through raindrops? What if your healing comes through tears? What if 1,000 sleepless nights are what it takes to know you're near? What if my greatest disappointments or the aching of this life is the revealing of the greater thirst this world can satisfy? And what if trials of this life remain the storms, the hardest nights? All your mercies in the sky. Are there any questions?
Thoughts, comments, concerns?
Hold on one second. Okay. Does anyone have any questions or concerns?
The caregiver blog,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it's caregiver.com, and we're adding to it every day. But we are starting webinars in September. And I do one-to-one coaching for caregivers as well. Actually, I had an interesting thing. I was working with a client about a year ago, and she's a caregiver, a mom of 2 special needs children. And the more I helped to coach her to do more writing. She's also a writer. And then I realized, actually, she called me one day and she said, well, I have these sticky notes all over my mirror, and I think that they're chapter titles. And so when she told me, it was actually a nice compliment to the book that I was writing. So I actually co-authored a book with her, and that's the journal that's in the back. We do have a little raffle for those of you who wanted to sign up. And I have a newsletter and caregiver support. I try to be a clearinghouse of information, to direct to other people. So, but the interesting thing about that one lady is she's coming here tomorrow because we've never met before. So we've been developing a relationship online and on the phone, and then tomorrow I get to meet her and her kids. She lives in Indiana, so she's going to drive 2 hours down here. So, all right. So thank you very much.